leadership dialogue with our Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of the Witwatersrand, Professor Zeblon Vilakazi. Before we begin, I would like to invite Professor Imran Valodia, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Commerce, Law and Management at Wits University, to welcome our Vice-Chancellor. Over to you, Professor Valodia.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Soko. This kind of series that Professor Soko runs is really geared to kind of sharing with you the kind of thoughts of a leader, and I think it's a kind of really special event that you can talk today not only to a great leader, but also the kind of leader of our own institution, and also one of South Africa's great scientists. And I think it's a kind of really fantastic opportunity for you to engage this evening with the Vice-Chancellor. So Prof Vilakazi was kind of appointed as the Vice-Chancellor, the Wits Vice-Chancellor and Principal at the start of 2021, kind of having served since kind of April kind of 2020 as the Vice-Chancellor and Vice Principal designate. Before that, he was the DVC for research at Wits University, and was quite instrumental in driving a kind of growth, both in the quantity and the impact of the university's research. He worked previously at the kind of Energy Corporation of South Africa, and also served as the director of Itemba Labs, and this is a position that he handled that he held until January of 2007. He's a Witsie through and through, having obtained his PhD from Wits in 1998, and having served thereafter as a postdoc at the kind of European Center for kind of Nuclear Research, kind of CERN in Geneva, where one of the most important experiments of our time was done, and kind of the VC was there involved in one of the most important papers done kind of in his field of nuclear physics. He served on a number of nuclear physics-related institutions, has been quite an influential player in the World Economic Forum, and is one of the leaders in the Academy of Science of South Africa. He's one of our most kind of extensively cited researchers in his field, and a truly great scientist of South Africa. With that, let me pass it back to you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Professor Valodia, and I would also like to thank Professor Vilakazi for giving up his time this afternoon to chat to us. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. By the way, we do apologize for the technical glitch which caused some of you to receive a notification occasion that this event was cancelled, we have rectified the problem and apologize for the inconvenience. My name is Mills Soko, Professor of International Business and Strategy at Wits Business School, and I welcome you all to this WBS Leadership Dialogue. It is on this platform that we invite top leaders in the public and private sectors and academia to share their views on leadership, business, and industry, and also to get their perspectives on some of the pressing challenges that we are facing as a nation and as a continent. Before we get started, some house rules. Firstly, if your microphone is on, please mute it now. Also, please switch off your video. This will help with any connectivity issues that you may have. If you'd like to ask any questions, please type them in the chat box and I will relay them to our guest. Please don't put up your hand and use any other means of communicating. Just use the chat box. In case you miss anything, this event is being live streamed and recorded. So we are getting started now. Good afternoon, Vice-Chancellor. You are muted, Vice-Chancellor.
Apologies. Good afternoon, and thank you, Prof Mills, for this very for this kind of invitation. It is indeed an honor to be asked to say something about leadership and I'd like to congratulate you and your team and the head of school really for these pioneering and stimulating conversations. And I'm delighted that I'm part of it, and just go easy on me. And also, I'd like to ask to take whatever the dean has said with a pinch of salt. I mean, maybe a leader, yes, I am, but not a good one, because that still needs to be determined after the end of my tenure. So, and a scientist I am, not a great one. If I was a great scientist, I would have, stayed on and become a scientist. So therefore, I got relegated into management.
Yeah, Vice-Chancellor, thank you. I would like to start by asking you some biographical questions. You were born in Katlehong, not far from here, born and bred there. I would like to ask you to tell us about your growing up. What it is like growing up for you, and who were your childhood influences?
That's an essay on its own. I'll try to be as brief as I possibly can. That, just to give a timestamp of my age, I grew up in Katlehong, kind of like late 1960s, 1969. So I'm an Apollo kid. And I was 7 in 1976. 16 and 17 in the second state of emergencies in 1985, 86. So as a kid, I was a Katlehong, as we used to be called. That was kind of like, my upbringing from spending your formative years in arguably one of the most difficult times in South Africa, where some of the choices one could have made would have ended up being a life and death situation. Something that I always tell the next generation, that, that is actually, they must appreciate what the little that they have. But the great influencers of my time, I think, that was also, apart from that, those are the days of Chiefs versus Pirates, Jomo versus Ace, Ali versus Frazier, Jimmy Connors versus McEnroe, this kind of dualities that Bjorn Borg versus McEnroe, those kind of dualities that were part of our growing up as kids. And I think the best person to articulate Mills, if I may, just dispense his titles for the flow, is best articulated by Dr. Dlamini, who wrote a very beautiful story about life in the 70s in Katlehong. Basically, life in the 1970s for all townships from Mdantsane, Langa, Soweto. I think that book actually articulates it very well. And he's one of us, although he's now based at Yale. It's about, some good times as well, weddings, parties, funerals, and also, of course, the difficulties of the violence and the struggle. But who were my great influences at the time, I think, was my family, a close-knit family. You have a local school, local church, local everything. But in actual fact, the people who influenced me the most, I'll say, was my uncle. I mean, he's the one who introduced me to jazz at the age of 10 years old. And I found that music terribly boring. It was torture. But now with my advancing age, as I enter my middle age, I spend more time listening to jazz. And I realized that the seeds that were planted and the love of learning. Also, of course, I had other great influencers as well. I mean, I had a cousin, we call him Buick, because I think he used to drive Buicks, and he used to wear these very nice leather jackets we call pointers, and leather coats we called backgrounds. I mean, the guy was the flashiest guy in town, and my brother was a teacher, and I felt that my brother was a muhu. You've got this guy here who is such a flashy guy, but of course he was a gangster. So, there's a kind of life of growing up as a youngster in the 70s where choices had to be made. And one could have made several choices that could have led into a different path.
Yeah. I read somewhere, Vice-Chancellor, that as a child, you wanted to become a soccer player or a boxer, and when I saw that, I just tried to imagine what football club you'd have played for, probably Benoni United or somewhere.
No, Orlando Pirates, of course, but I didn't have the talent.
Yeah. You never imagined that you would be a scientist until you watched the launch of the Space Shuttle Columbia in 1981. Could you please tell us, how this first shuttle voyage to space inspired your imagination and sparked your interest in science?
Obviously, if as a youngster you show a bit of talent or ability, as it were, medicine or law would be your choice, apart from teaching and nursing or priesthood. So science was not, or even engineering for that matter, was not something that people thought of. I'd heard of, through my teacher at my primary school, I'd heard of the launch of all these space things, but they never really were engraved in my imagination. Until one day, I was playing football outside the local store that I'm sure that the head of school knows about, Wabab Temba, Bramoris. And the shopkeeper actually, in a spirit of community, knew that I liked a bit of science, but, and he turned the TV in front of me and said, "Hey, Mr. Vilakazi's son, come here, watch this." And I was playing football with the guys, just left them, and I was just engrossed seeing the countdown of this STC Columbia Shuttle, April 1981. I think it actually sparked one's imagination until it became a tiny speck of dust. And then next week, actually, I asked my school teacher, and then, the rest is history, I suppose.
Yeah. And, just building on that, you have an abiding interest in the study of war, in the psychology of war. That's one of the things I've learned about you, which was in turn ignited by your interest in rocket science. Can you explain to us the link between rocket science and the study of war? I try to imagine how this exactly works. So if you could explain that, how your interest in the study of war, the psychology of war, was inspired by your interest in rocket science.
Yes, I mean, I can add that dimension to that, as I alluded to briefly as well. I mean, also growing up in a tough environment, you understand conflict, right? I mean, Katlehong is not an easy, or in other neighborhood for that matter, but in particular, Katlehong in the 80s, and in particular late 80s and early 90s, was a tough environment. So therefore, in a way, conflict is part of you, kind of war becomes part of understanding conflict on an escalated scale. But I think at a more intellectual level, if I might use that word, when I started reading biographies of all the scientists, the nuclear physicists like Albert Einstein who had to leave Germany and went to America to build this, Manhattan Project, which is basically the largest big science project of its kind, where all the scientists went, and there was a space race between, kind of a nuclear race between the Americans, the Allies, the British Americans, and the Germans, as who was going to build the first bomb, right? And of course, the German project was led by a physicist called Heisenberg, and the US one was led by Oppenheimer, with all these European immigrants, the first big brain drain of a large scale. And then, of course, the explosion in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a sad experiment, to use the word, of that deployment of that technology in anger. So that actually, in a way, I know I'm saying this as a scientist, that actually war was a great spark for that particular growth in the nuclear race, followed by, of course, the space race. Because as soon as Gagarin and Sputnik went to the moon, went to the orbit, it was clear that now the next terrain of this race was going to be in outer space. Initially, they were all rocket scientists. Initially, they were all also Nazi rocket scientists who developed the V2 bombers that bombed London. So you can tell that the space race, the rocket technology, the primary aim was not so benevolent. It came out of actually World War II, the acceleration of big science, right? Came out of that war situation. So it was part of a much bigger global geopolitical strategic mind game, which culminated in the 50s with the Cold War, ending in 1990 with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the, of course, demise of the Soviet Union. As you can tell, if you play war games, that this was basically a three-dimensional chess game played first between the Germans and the Allies, and secondly between the East and the West, with all other proxy wars in between. So central to that was rocket technology, the biggest nuclear arms, this conquest for the space, who's got the biggest rockets, the largest stockpile of nuclear arsenal, right? And I think sanity prevailed. So war, military technology, and science with physics at its heart have been central. So that's how you can just imagine this whole complexity of war and science and rocket science in the mix.
You've been in office for 9 months now, and if you could just tell us, what it's been like, leading the university these past few months, and perhaps also tell us, if this job of being Vice-Chancellor is what you expected it to be. So what has it been like to lead our university in the last 9 months, and when you made yourself available for this job, and you've been doing it for 9 months, is this what you expected it to be?
Can I just before I answer that question and slightly continue the previous one, because I think I wanted to make an important point that has a bearing on this discussion here, as now an educator, kind of leading an educational institution. I think part of the global war that you see playing itself out beyond the Cold War is now in what I would call the technosphere, the entire 4G, 5G battle, the entire silicon chips that are used for these, what you call 4R technologies. Can you see now that this conflict has moved into a different plane? It's no longer about the sphere, it's now the technosphere, right? Between obviously China and the United States now, right? The war of tech. And then where do you play a role in that part, right? So now you can see now again in the next layer of this geopolitical, technological, intellectual battlefield, we have been laggards in this area. And I think the key institutions that should play a role here are academic ones, especially a university like this one, which has been right at the heart of the country's second industrialization, right? Albeit in a way exclusive, but at least we actually were able as South Africa to ride the second wave of the Industrial Revolution with the deep level mining and the industrialization of South Africa, establishment of Sasol and so on and so forth. So I think that that's one of the major drivers that actually propelled me to put my name forward, because I think that I do believe that the best way to succeed in this game is through people, human resource, human capital development. That if you are able to create an enabling environment that allows your brightest and the best and the most determined young people to learn the way of the world at various levels, in their management skills, in their understand the global politics at a much more strategic level, understand the international world of business, understand the science that undergirds that business, and health sciences around it, I think will go a long way in doing something that you and I of our middle age cannot do, but they can take the patient forward and hopefully make sure that they lead South Africa and the continent into an area, into an era where we can actually have a well-deserved seat on the table. And I think that is through education, through the mastery of the tools of the trade in this space. So I think that was what actually inspired me. And really the last 9 months now, time goes so fast, have been exciting. I think I had some challenges initially, but everyone doesn't walk into this job blindly. You are aware that managing a university as complex as Wits in a highly unequal society, in the period of high expectations, but at the same time, resources are not there, will bring its own challenges. And I think that I have had, I've enjoyed this position, quite frankly, and I think I wouldn't look back. I think it's been an incredibly inspiring and exciting position, especially with very determined, very bright colleagues that are supporting me in that regard and challenging me at the same time as well.
Yeah, you've spoken about challenges at the beginning of your tenure, and one of those was, 6 weeks into your tenure, Wits University and other universities were rocked by student protests against historical student debt. And you are on record as having said that, that really surprised you, and also that it could have been handled better from the perspective of Wits. Could you please elaborate? What did you mean by that? You were not happy with that from what I gathered, from what I read, from what you said, also in interviews on television.
Yes, I think that handled better I'm talking about the Wits collective here, right? I think at some stage as a university, you need to have a conversation around this, what I would call route one, protest, we respond. And then we deal with one or another and come to a form of a settlement. Could we actually preamble that with more jaw conversations before we come to a point where there's going to be reaction and counter-reaction, and therefore it becomes the battle of the battle of the wits, pun not intended, to say who actually can have a better battle plan to suppress a protest. I mean, that's not how we should run a university. University, yes, is run in terms of ensuring that we do the best we can, we manage expectations appropriately, and at the same time are able to not avoid conflict, manage conflict in a way that doesn't result in this almost year in, year out type of engagement. I think that is something that we as South Africans, especially coming in the aftermath of what happened in July, that there are certain behavioral tendencies that can escalate to what you saw in July. So therefore, one needs to find a means of tackling difficult conversations without resorting to techniques that we used in the 1980s. The world has moved on. There's a better way of handling complex than just going to the streets.
Yeah, Vice-Chancellor, now let me move to the strategic priorities of the university and the role of Wits University in South Africa, in Africa, and the world. Wits is a globally recognized and competitive university, but whose roots remain deeply embedded in South Africa and the broader African continent. Now, given this institutional identity and positioning, what do you think is or ought to be the role of Wits in South Africa, Africa, and the world?
I think the role is defined by our locality. I mean, Wits is an African and a global university, in a sense that it is located effectively in Africa's continent's commercial, cultural, and I might add, intellectual hub. It is Africa's most complex and dynamic city, challenges notwithstanding. So therefore, with every big city, right, there has to be a response to that, must be the kind of intellectual center of gravity that drives the economy, that drives the thought process, that drives the forward thinking of how we can take the country forward. So therefore, if Wits fails, Johannesburg fails, South Africa fails, and a certain region of the subcontinent will fail. So therefore, VETS is too crucial for it to perform below par. So I think that it has what I would call mission critical goals to achieve. Pursuit of excellence, and I've made it clear that if anyone doesn't believe in that concept, they must ask themselves, are they at the right place? Because we'll be unremitting in our quest for achievement of excellence in whatever we do. And also changing society for the better, one way or another. We do not have, as I always say, the monopoly of what Weber calls control, right? I mean, we are in intellectual space. We cannot change society. We cannot cover for failures in other aspects of local and provincial government and national government. But we can help where we can, because we do have the skills and the I would call the will to make a meaningful contribution to society for good.
I'll come back to that, that issue about whether VETS can solve all society's problems, because universities have specific roles to play, which include in contributing towards societal development. But we also have to recognize that there are limitations to what they can do and what they cannot do. And I've had this conversation also with the business sector, who have told me that there are certain things that they can do to contribute, but there are certain they can't, and they have to be done by government or NGOs and all that. So I'll come back to that. But what I want to ask you now is, there is this process underway currently at VETS. It's a very comprehensive and wide-ranging process to formulate a new strategy for the university, strategic plan 2033. What I would like to know, I don't want you to preempt that process. It's been ongoing, and we had a Senate meeting last week where we received a report from the people who are involved as to where we are. But if you could just tell us, why is this process important? Firstly, why is this process important? The strategic review process important? And without preempting the work that is being done, what would you say ought to be the most important strategic priorities of the university? So why is this process important? And what do you think should be the most important strategic priorities of the university?
Yeah, can I maybe reverse my response will be in reverse format, and I'll give you one key role of the university in society, at least according to my kind of worldview. A university is a source of soft power, right? When you don't control the military, you don't control the finance. But what is our power? Our power is to inspire. We want university, and our strength lies in our endurance. We'll endure for 1,000 years. If you go to all these great centers of learning that have been around for 1,000 years, they inspire people, right? People can see. You go to the Acropolis, that is where Plato was thinking. You go to Trinity College, Cambridge, and not Trinity.
In Ireland?
No, at Cambridge, one of the colleges in Cambridge, you can say, Milton Keynes was there. Isaac Newton pondered gravity there, right? You go to some of these great temples in India, where you go like Aryabhata, one of the great founders of arithmetic, was there, right? So I think that's what universities do, because they pass knowledge across generations when all the political forces have ebbed and flowed, but they are a common thread that connect us, that connect our past and inspire us into the future. So in 1,000 years, people must go to VETS and say, this is where, whatever, something great in terms of new ideas about sociology, about politics, about physics, mathematics, health, medicine were inspired. That's what university's role is. So therefore, they actually should not reflect society, should be what society must aspire for. They're aspirational and inspirational, and that's all. So our strategy must be built upon that fundamental assumption that the university is there to make South Africa look up and say, you know, we read depressing news every day. What is it that can make South Africans aspire for better, right? And I think this is basically at the heart of this, what I would call the moonshot idea, that, you know what, this too shall pass, but lift your gaze up a little bit and imagine, get out of this orbit and say, you can do better. And I think that's our role. And our role is to actually, you know, put all these strategic plans in place just to align with this vision that I've spoken about. And that's not just basically using.
So if I may follow up on that, the process that is underway. So what do you think should be sort of the strategic priorities of the university? I understand what you're saying, but you know, if you're saying to mention 2 or 3 strategic priorities, what would those be?
Right. I spoke about the vision and its role. Now, what are the priorities? Obviously, priority number 1 is, at the heart of this mission are the people, the academics, right? You know, we need to continue attracting, retaining, and allowing for progression of some of the best academics we can find in the global south. Same with students. Those are the key strategic priorities that will support this. But among others will be, of course, continuation of educating some of the best future minds that will become better leaders of the future. And also, these are the kind of 3 key, what I would call them, basic things that a university must do. But the strategy that drives us is, what do you want to be in 20 years' time? We need to innovate. We need to be an innovative university, right? We need to change the game completely altogether. That we should be producing our own mRNA technologies. We can do it. We should be spawning our own businesses. We should actually be educating tech leaders, business leaders. And I think if we achieve half of that, we shall have been bold and we shall have succeeded.
Right, at this point, I would like to reiterate my invitation to members of the audience. If you have questions or comments to make, which you want me to relate to the Vice-Chancellor, please just write those in the chat box. I'm very keen to hear what you have to say. Now, Vice-Chancellor, early in the year, you identified 2 goals for your tenure. One was to create an MIT-styled digital technology hub at the university that will commercialize some of the groundbreaking research that we produce. And the other one was to build a new cohort of young scholars from diverse backgrounds that will be future leaders and innovators who will help transform our higher education sector and take this country forward. So those were the 2 goals that you identified at the beginning of your tenure. Could you please elaborate on your thinking around these goals, these 2 goals? And also, can you please outline what you think needs to happen to ensure a successful realization of those goals?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, that for the want of better expression, I used the MIT style, and I think I was misinterpreted for saying that I want to make VEST the MIT of Africa. But it's just an example I thought I would use as a template. Is what propelled a country that was in the 1920s, a backwater, the United States, in particular California, was very much a backwater in the technological space, industrial space, where MIT and Caltech and Stanford, right, which spawned effectively Sun Microsystems, we spawned the Silicon Valley, which now changes the way we live, work, and interact. I think that the other countries in the world are thinking along those lines as well. If we are, as a university, do what we are capable of, it is that we need to be a university that innovates. And through our strategy of creating a tech hub with Katlehong as at its center, there is enough appetite. I've spoken to a lot of young students and even faculty as well, staff, who actually want to take their ideation into something that is an innovative and commercial venture that will grow to scale. In terms of the achievements on that side, we have changed the portfolio of the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Postgraduate Affairs into DVC, Research and Innovation. And now we are creating an innovation platform and hired one of our senior experts in that area. So already systems are in place now to actually actualize that. On the side of the future professors, I would call it the Young Fellows Rising Star Program, which is already bearing fruit. We're able to receive funding from the Oppenheimer Foundation for these fellows, where we get young scholars of promise who actually can see themselves in the next 10, 15 years as being leaders. But how do we enable them without being burdened by other administrative and other kind of like distractions, and let them do what they're good at? And I think that is a kind of a long range investment in our people, in the potential to create, again, if maybe one of them goes on and wins an economics prize, Nobel Prize, or a Nobel Prize in physics, then we shall have achieved. I think that is something that will create a pipeline of those future global leaders in their area.
If I may follow up on that, Vice Chancellor, you know, I've spoken to some people about this issue, you know, because people want to know what's going on at Wits and all that. And some have read what you've said and this MIT style, and I'm glad that you raised this issue, you know, because for some people it's really, really, it's something that is foreign, you know. It's, why do we need an MIT style? Yeah, you know, we're in Africa here, and come on, man, you must tell your Vice Chancellor to really, really come to grips about this thing. You know, if you were to it's important, but the challenge is, firstly, how you communicate this thing in ways that people can understand and relevant. Why is this relevant in the African context? You know, I see what you mean. It happened in the United States and all that. And it is critical, but it's happening in China now. But you know, how can we develop a language that Africans can understand, you know, and that can enable them to have a vested interest in what you're talking about here. You know, here in Braamfontein, you know, what you're telling me, we want to do it here in Braamfontein, but if I were to walk along the streets there and talk about this thing, they think I'm crazy. What are you talking about? So how do we develop that language which people can understand, and how do we, because I'm not an expert on this, but I'm just trying to think, we obviously have to have partnerships with the provincial government and all. How do we really make this thing work?
You know, I'll answer in a form of a parable, actually, or rather a paradoxical question is, when you think of an IT tech guy, what comes to your mind? Right? What comes to your mind? The answer is, it was actually a question that was asked at a women's IT forum, right? By a Dutch lady who was running a big tech startup. And he said, the world over, when you think of a tech innovator, you think of a sporty-faced white boy wearing a hoodie, working out of mom's garage or out of a college dorm in Stanford or Boston. Your idea of a tech geek, you think of that kind of hyper smart 18-year-old white kid working out of mom's garage, right? I mean, that actually is the wrong narrative. So you already have, in a way, centralized, or when you think of a scientist, in our case, I mean, having watched Back to the Future, we think of a white guy with a big beard, wearing a dust coat and kind of acting eccentrically, right? I mean, that's how you think of a scientist. You page every book And that's at the fundamental core of the knowledge and innovation question, because knowledge and innovation. So it's about that intellectual leapfrog you're going to make, which is why I was asked by journalists last week about why does South Africa need to invest in upstream research instead of just really focusing on malaria, TB, HIV, and so on and so forth. And I said, actually, that almost is, again, relegating Africans into the third end of the knowledge chain. So you're leaving the abstraction, the thought, the innovation to the global north. I mean, which I think is at best. I mean, I can use other superlatives to actually describe that. You know, it's there are stronger ways to describe that kind of thinking. So I think we need to change that equation, and it is us who can change the equation. So in response, in terms of using a simple language, we can ask them, don't you want South Africans to produce their own cars? Don't you want South Africans to produce their own product, to write their own software, not having to import things? So how do you do that? You know, that I am not a great communicator, but I leave it to my expert communicators here to say, why do you have to import things? Why can't you make it vukuzenzele, you know? Why can't you do it yourself?
Yeah. Vice Chancellor, you know, that's like most South African universities has been faced with a really tough financial crunch, financial quandary. On the one hand, you have debt, you know, owed by students that has been growing every year. And on the other hand, there's not been much, there's been sluggish action on the part of government to develop a viable funding policy for the tertiary sector, education sector in South Africa. And I read a report the other day which estimates, you know, historical student debt to be in the region of 14 billion rands. But that report also says this is just a speculative. It could be higher, it could be much higher. So this is one of the big challenges that faces the tertiary education sector in South Africa. Now, there have been calls on the basis of this, you know, there have been calls notably made by several student representative councils, you know, SRCs, on various campuses across the country that, you know, the historical student debt must be scrapped. So there's been very, you know, vociferous calls to that end. And what is your response to this? Firstly, so this is a two-pronged question. What is your response to these calls? And secondly, what do you think needs to happen, needs to be done, you know, to deal with this problem, lingering problem of student debt in a sustainable way? Are you having discussions with the other vice chancellors about this? Because this won't go away. So what needs to happen with the issue of debt, student debt in South Africa?
You all carry debt one way or another, right? I mean, the form of the mortgage of your house, or you purchase a product, or even a company has to have debt as well, right? I mean, because debt is part of the whole equation of accounting, debt, equity, and assets. So debt is part of us. So you cannot remove debt. Debt has to be managed, right? And keep and maintain at the right level. I don't believe that you can just wipe off debt. I think there's no mathematical equation that is debtless. I believe that the only equation you have is the equation of accounting that talks about the three factors in this. So you cannot have an equation without one of the three components in an equation. I'm using simple mathematics here. Debt is debt. You cannot run away from it. It has to be managed, number one. So therefore, you cannot just wipe off debt like that. It just, I mean, it's not even good economics. But at the same time, I understand the dilemma that government is facing as well, because I think the tertiary education, in particular the higher education sector, is really at the apex of the PICT. As I'm talking to you now, South Africa, in the post-secondary education system, we only have just under, say, 1 million students in that sector, million people under the age of 25, say between 25 and 18. What about the remaining 14 million or so, if I do my statistics right? So actually, we are looking at the tip of the iceberg, for the want of a better word. I think the problem cannot just be solved by focusing on the capstone of a pyramid, which is sticking out of a desert, when you know that there is a fundamental issue that we have to face as South Africans. So I don't think that government can solve that problem alone. And I understand the dilemma that they're facing. One of them requires kind of again, a private, public, and private and government involvement to solve this problem. And also just not to run away from the issue is that we are not the only ones. In the United States, I read Time magazine, The Economist actually just about under a year ago, the US sits with $1.7 trillion of debt, right? The United Kingdom, a few kind of like 65 billion pounds of debt as well. So, but then this debt is all aggregated, because some debt is about people who actually have dropped out of the system, failed, and or don't pay back. So this historical debt is not just one single debt. You just cannot pay their fees because they're passing. So it's made up of many, many subcomponents that you cannot just with one fell swoop say it's gone. No, I think you need to look at this debt situation on the basis of what kind of a debt it is. You cannot just sweep debt under one blanket.
I have two questions from the chat box, Vice-Chancellor. One from Bulelo Kibido. The question is, how does the VC see the role of vets in playing a part in reducing poverty and unemployment in South Africa? So that's the first question. The other one is from Sibulelo Ngamani. Sibulelo Ngamani is my PhD student, Vice-Chancellor. So he's written here, he says, Theodore Roosevelt, in his famous speech, The Man in the Arena, says the standard of the average citizen must be kept high, but that cannot happen unless the standard of the leaders is very much higher. And the question is there a deliberate attempt by vets to cultivate leaders who will play this crucial role in lifting the standard average of the citizen? I'm not sure if you got those two questions. So the first one is, how can vets contribute towards reducing poverty and unemployment in South Africa? And the other one, what role can vets play in cultivating a leadership that can raise the standard of the citizen? So
Right. The first one from Mulelo Kibido is is that vets cannot obviously alleviate poverty. I mean, you need hundreds of billions of dollars to solve that. But we are running here many research entities and centers that can advise policymakers in the School of Governance. Among others, I'll mention the one that the Dean is heading, initiated the Southern Center for the Study of Inequality. That can influence policy. You can write policy documents, because our role is not to govern, our role is to advise. It is the government. Poverty has to be resolved by government. You cannot resolve it. We don't have the resources nor the scalability to solve it. So we can just, we've got the business school, a top business school, we've got the top school of governance. All they can do is advise the appropriate policymakers to implement the right policy and drive them strongly. Quite frankly, the exacerbation of poverty has been driven by and large, let's be honest, by some of the corrupt practices. There's enough money in this country, to actually even sustain universities correctly. I mean, we're running one of the most sophisticated economies in the global south. We should be able to address all these problems. It's just about lack of implementation and lack of getting the right people. We can train the best people to come and work in some of these departments and deliver to those in need and fulfill our mandate as a producer of talent, working with other universities as well. The one from
Sibulelo.
Effectively answers the first one. It's not my job to answer. You're a senator, so you're a professor, you teach. I'm an administrator. So the question must be answered by you and the other academics here. So it's the job of the academics, of the high priest of knowledge, to produce those kind of leaders. We just have to ensure that you've got the right Senate policies that enable you to do the job of educating the right leaders, and then pay you well and motivate you well to do that job.
Yes. So I've got two more questions, Vice-Chancellor, from the chat box. One from Dr. Logan Rangasamy, who's the academic director at Wits Business School. And the question is, what is the VC's view on the appropriate balance between competition and collaboration with the other universities in South Africa. And then the other one is from Jane Balneves, who's our communications manager at Wits Business School. And the question is, let me go back now to that question. It says, you talk about innovation and there are great things happening at Wits. Do you think a vibrant physical campus life with face-to-face learning is important for this? If so, when do you see this happening for the thousands of undergraduates who have not had any experience of campus life because of COVID?
Yeah, let me start with Jane's question. I think that one is actually, complex, but they're straightforward.
Yeah.
I think at the moment we are thinking very hard about the vaccine, kind of the vax mandate, whether to make it mandatory or not. I think without getting as many people as vaccinated as we possibly can, Jane, we will continue operating in this mode next year. And I think that will be much to the detriment of students, because the university is not about content. It is about co-ideation in a space of, a group of people of similar thinking. So you can download content from the internet and from Ulwazi, but I think that the real education happens when people co-ideate and share the views through syndicates, as you have in the business school. So I think that that can only happen if now there's a buy-in from the collective good of the university, that we all should contribute towards common good, which is to vaccinate. Because if we don't vaccinate and we're standing as a Wits community at only 10% of those that ought to be vaccinated, it's not as low as that here, then I think we'll be back where we are in 2 years' time, and therefore all these plans won't work. And I think I agree with you. It is about actually, last year maybe it was different, but this year we do have vaccines, and science has shown that they've got particular levels of efficacy and are able to protect us. So I do believe that one is a practical answer. There's a practical answer to this. So to Logan, yes, of course, I think universities are compete, and yet they cooperate with each other. South African universities alone, Wits alone cannot have the scale to take on and solve all the problems that even universities in the North cannot solve. We have formed a research triangle of universities, Wits, UJ, and UP, primarily to create what I would call is that the right word? I'm in the business school here now. Economies of scale, to tackle all those problems on a scale that can allow us to, pound for pound, be able to match the more, the wealthier universities of the global North.
So Vice Chancellor, just to go back to Jane's question about COVID-19 and vaccination, UCT's Senate recently voted overwhelmingly in favor of a policy that, to make COVID-19 vaccines mandatory. What's the position of Wits on the mandatory vaccination?
You'll hear from us in 2 days' time on that. We are working on it. We are going through a consultative process, using appropriate evidence-based approaches. I'm under the assumption here that everyone wants to come back to campus, because we are here to teach. We are here to ensure that our students have the real lived experience of being a university student. SET is working on practices rather of how we can manage this until we arrive at the right policy. So I think we'll keep the university informed in due course.
And there's a question also from the chat box from Tiens, which says, Wits leveraging of funds to the much needed funding of the needy postgraduate students. Is Wits priority on equity targets when it comes to students and staff positions? Wits centers of excellence in ensuring excellence throughout. What would be Wits' niche areas compared to other universities of technology? So I think the crux of the question is there is it Wits' priority on equity targets when it comes to students and staff positions?
I think that equity and excellence are not separate, right? I think they are, if you're to draw, I know that if you're to draw them on an x-axis in a Cartesian plane, x and y, excellence and transformation they're all basically in the same quadrant, right? So therefore, I don't want to see this as either or. So whilst pursuing excellence, at the same time, we'll ensure that we create a diverse cohort of students that will be leaders in the area. So I don't see this as we are going for equity at the expense of excellence. We are doing both at the same time. But I think the question that I think would be the best niche areas compared to the universities of technology. The universities of technology were established as technicons. I mean, they are largely really about practical skills, right? You know, all the dental technologies that we have, they mostly focus on diplomas that and to create a real life experience. And that is where, as a country, we need to remodel this. I think the centers of the University of Technology and the TVETs and the technicons and the technical colleges need to be reintroduced again. South Africa needs more fitters and turners, tool and die makers, people who can build infrastructure and make sure that whenever there is a fault with the water system, that cannot be solved by an engineer who works on design, who comes from Wits UCT or Stellenbosch or UP or UJ. That can be solved by a technician. You know, I think all our structural problems are not at a level of an engineer. They're at a level of, do we still have the right, what I would call practical skills to solve these problems? And I think there has been a conflation of roles of universities and universities of technology. And I think, and what I call technical universities or technical schools. And for us to address our unemployment issues and solve all our infrastructural backlogs, I would actually prioritize, and I'm saying this as a Vice-Chancellor of university, I'd prioritize TVETs, you know, as a South African, than I would universities.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about the TVETs, you know, previously. And why they need to be revamped, you know, because universities cannot accept everyone who wants to study at a tertiary level. Now, you know, what's your assessment of the TVET system currently? What is your assessment? Is it doing what it has been established to, you know, to do? And what needs to be done to ensure TVETs contribute meaningfully towards national development in South Africa?
I think TVETs are at the base of solving some of the unemployment issues we face. South Africa has an issue of not unemployment issue, unemployability issue. There's a need for skills in fixing what is not right with the infrastructure, right? And so tackling some of the basic problems. The potential for TVETs is huge. And TVETs have not yet, the structure, the way they are configured, I believe for a country with our structural challenges, they're not delivering what they ought to be delivering. And I'm sure that, and I'm glad to hear that the Minister of Higher Education and Training, Science and Technology, is focusing on that. And I think he's really put a finger on the pulse and said that the problem with TVETs, it requires some restructuring and rethinking and reimagination of how these TVETs can be done. And that must be done fairly rapidly. Time is moving quite fast. Our unemployment rates are rising. So we need to ensure that we create a system that enables those young people to have the skills necessary for them to empower themselves. And I think TVETs are central in doing that. That cannot be jobs of universities. And the universities don't actually offer the kind of training that is important at that stage for all the pressing needs that we need as a country. To keep our lights on, to keep our robots functioning, it requires people who are trained in TVETs.
Yeah. There's a question from—
I don't mean robots, the 4R robots. I mean the robots in the South African context, traffic lights.
Yeah. There's a question from Dumisani Khadebe, Vice-Chancellor. He wants to know what your view is on alumni influencing the strategic direction of an institution because of the resources they direct to the institution.
Alumni are crucial in this because alumni, in a way, are among the central stakeholders because they have chosen to elect to have a degree from Wits, and that degree sticks with them for the rest of their lives. So therefore, the life and health of this university influences their job prospects as well. So therefore, it is within, if I was to use it, it is in their interest to ensure that the university is in the right direction. And it is within their interest to actually write to the Vice-Chancellor and say, I'm not happy with A, B, C, and D. Obviously, there are 100,000 alumni. I don't think that my office can deal with 100,000 letters, or say even 20,000 letters coming from alumni. So there are structures like the convocation is one conduit through which some of the issues can be escalated.
I just want to go back to an issue which is of great concern to a lot of academics, that I've spoken to. I think that probably includes staff, administrative staff, about the state of universities. And this is not unique to South Africa. I've spoken to colleagues in the UK, in Scandinavia, where universities are also faced with a serious financial challenges. And some of them are retrenching. Some of them are, for instance, the Montfort University in the UK has started something called seconding its academics to other universities, because they cannot keep them, and so that has created a lot of hiatus, in the UK. So given this reality, Vice Chancellor, you have spoken about this importance of attracting the best talent and retaining the best talent. And your predecessor, Professor Habib, also spoke a lot about that. So given this reality, how, with declining financial resources and the need to rationalize and all those things, universities are becoming concerned about financial austerity, and the impact that will have on the academic project. How do you think that will fare in terms of continuing to attract the best talent and retaining the best talent?
You've got to, earlier on I mentioned, you asked me a question about my interest in boxing. I've got to say, you go to Box Clever, right? It's called Boxing Clever. Boxing Clever, which is why we are doing this strategic realignment process. You've got to focus on what are the key strategic priorities. What is the Wits that we want? What makes Wits tick? What will make Wits the university that ought to be in the next 10 years? And then once you've made those strategic decisions, and that's currently a process that is being developed by the team. So then the university will know what are the areas you focus on. You can't do everything all at once. That's what I mean by boxing clever.
There's a question from Joseph.
What are the key strategic priorities? And those key strategic priorities will be prioritized, and the allocation of funding will be channeled as such.
There's a question, Vice Chancellor, from Joseph Flakotsa. Wits was ranked number 2 in Africa by QS World University ranking. Any ambitions or plans to put it at the number 1 spot in future?
I think for quite a while in 1 or 2 other rankings, we've been ranked number 1, and our sister university where I worked for many years was ranked number 2, whose name I'll not mention. And these things are,
I know that university.
a year on year, but year on year, kind of crude matrices and indicators that just reduce something as complex as university into a number, but they're important nonetheless. The way I see ranking is like a stock market, what you call the share options. You don't focus on the share, you focus on the performance. Let's focus on our key strategic priorities, do what is right, and rankings will reflect that in 2-3 years' time. So because rankings are a reflection of your achievements in the last 6-7 years or so, and they get reflected much later. So I think we just need to keep our focus on what we as a university are good at. And then the rankings will reflect that.
Yeah.
Depending on what the ranking agencies are looking for, because there's so many of them, they look for different things. But let's just keep our focus on what we are good at and do it very well.
Yeah.
And improve where we are weak.
But they do matter. Rankings do matter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, they do matter. I think we do follow them closely. And even yours truly has been guilty. When you've done very well in rankings, we ensure that we may make a media splash. But that's true. I won't lie about that.
Yeah. Now, Vice Chancellor, I want to, the role of the university in society. And I've spoken to a few academic leaders in South Africa who are really concerned about the pressures that are being put on universities in terms of the role that they perform in society. Universities are increasingly being called upon to perform roles and solve problems. And you spoke about that earlier, that are traditionally dealt with by other societal actors. So universities are now being called upon to make up for the failures of other societal actors. And I want to be blunt, I will say one of them is the government, so because of governance failures, other sectors of society now being called upon to make up for this, be it NGOs or business, but universities increasingly are being drawn into this. So this is it's mission creep, it's mission creep. What is your view on this, on this expanding role of universities? Is a danger that this could really compromise universities? So in other words, where does the role of the university start? Where does it end? What can universities do and can't do? So if you were to have that conversation with the Minister of Higher Education and say, look, Dr. Zimande, look, I know you want us to help, but I can tell you this: we can do this, we can't do this. You must know that we can't just. That must be done by you as the government. Where does it start? Where does it
end? There's no start, there's no end. It's a continuum. I cannot just say there's a particular cutoff, because universities are located in society. We are, first, all of us as individuals, we are citizens of South Africa. Even if someone is not the South African citizen, but they've got a stake in this because they get their salary from here, they'll potentially get their pension from here. So all of us, being South Africans or not, we have a stake in this game. So I do believe that we cannot divorce ourselves from societal issues because they impact on us. That's why we put an effort Mills in ensuring that the area around Braamfontein is our priority in terms of safety, in particular for women, staff, and students, because and we're working with the city in addressing that. And I think it's been wonderful. All the infants, the Katlehong digital precinct, all the partnership we have with private accommodation companies is part of actually making Braamfontein a place where people can live, play, work, and study. And I think we are part of Johannesburg. We are not isolated. So therefore, and we are part of this province and this city that we cannot divorce ourselves from. So that's a point number one. And universities actually do have a role in society beyond just teaching and learning and outreach and community engagement. In a crisis, universities must be drawn into some of those things. Where the cutoff lies, I don't know. It depends. You look at COVID. COVID could not be solved in South Africa without the involvement of universities. Our health economists, our social scientists, our data modelers, our clinicians were central in all these MECs. Whether our advisors listen to is another story. That's all we can do. We don't have the monopoly of violence that actually has been given to the democratic state, the monopoly of control, the monopoly of implementation, as it should. Right? I'm not an elected official. I'm a selected official. I'm not responsible to the populace. So that, I think, is something that we cannot divorce ourselves from. And it's not unique to South Africa as well. In the global financial crisis of 2007, a lot of the presidential advisory committee members, like Lady Summers and many others, left the academy and worked in the National Treasury. You remember that, right? When we had this crisis in the 2007-8, the banking crisis. I mentioned earlier, some students, some member of the audience about the role of physicists in World War II. Hopefully you don't get there. I might like war strategy, but I don't like wars. Is that in World War II, many university professors left their tenured positions at Stanford. No, Stanford wasn't that. At Oxford University and blah blah blah, and joined the war effort, right? In development, in radar development. Even our own academics in 1940s in South Africa during the war effort, led by Dr. Professor Bozzoli and Professor Schonland, left and helped develop radar for the war effort. So, you know, they couldn't say, no, it's not our problem. It's not a military problem. The military said, you know, you've got all the expertise. The economists would say you've got all the expertise. The politicians can say we need someone who can give us political advice on A, B, C, and D. Then that's our role where needed. And if people can listen to us.
Just on COVID, on that theme, COVID, you know, COVID-19 has affected university in very, very significant ways. Some of it positive, some of it negative. How would you assess the performance of VET in terms of navigating the COVID-19 pandemic? And the reason I'm asking that question is that, you know, last year, university executives issued a really glowing statement that, you know, we've done very well, all the universities have done well. And then there was a letter, there was an article which was published by 300 academics, which contested that view that, you know, this has been a great success. And some of the academics made a very strong point that the impact of COVID-19 on universities had compromised academic standards. So if you could just tell us how has VETS done and what your response to the criticism that was issued by those academics. You know, that you are too self-congratulatory as university executives, you know, this was, there were problems, you know, that were identified.
Yeah, given where we are, I think that statement is I agree. We were not self-congratulatory at all. We're doing a situation analysis of where we were, how quickly as a university we pivoted towards an unknown territory, right? Imagine when an airplane gets struck by before taking off, like this pilots in America, and then the airplane lands on water instead of crashing. We should congratulate ourselves because the plane didn't crash and kill people, but we were able to do emergency landing and save lives, right? And again, here there's a corollary, there's a parallel. You could have all gone belly up and say, no, if you can't teach online, then, sorry, if you can't do face-to-face teaching, then let's all go home. So, you know, I think that one has to be realistic that actually we are not working in a situation where everything is optimal and ideal. And given where we are and the rapidity with which we shifted towards online, saved the academic year, learned as we are trying to refit the pistons of this engine in mid-air without it crashing, I think I can say it again, we did well, as good as our peers in more better resource countries did. We were able to rescue the academic year. We have learned some of the shortcomings without any prior historical lessons of managing this online learning. And it has taught us new things as well. The future of learning has not been changed irrevocably.
You know, still on that. So what are the lessons we've learned as a university? So in the post-COVID period, we need to reset. What lessons have we learned, and how are we going to reset? Are we going to, you know, the hybrid model of learning? Is that now the new normal?
Yeah, the senior TVC, Prof Osman, who's an kind of a field expert, and also is a person responsible for this portfolio, will be able to answer that better. I mean, from a background as a field expert in terms of pedagogy. But I think that one thing that is for sure is that the future of education is neither face-to-face nor fully online. It's somewhere in between. That's why we call it about the hybrid. What form it will take will be dependent on the field itself It will be dependent on what is needed. Obviously, I was at Bara this morning. I wouldn't want to go under the knife or have my child treated by a doctor who did everything online. I wouldn't want to fly in an airplane whose engineer did his education online. I wouldn't want to, as you know, you wouldn't want to go under a surgeon, under the knife of a surgeon, I mean, in that hypothetical situation, Mills, from a doctor who did his surgery and specialization through Zoom. I think that wouldn't happen, right? You still need that hands-on practical experience. So I think that is the question, that certain fields will demand that, practical face-to-face in various. But maybe whether are you gonna have 300 students in class in a cubicle room with 300 people, one lecturer in front of them, when you've got access to information nowadays, you don't have to rely on the library, and with the professor being the only sole provider of knowledge, I doubt it, right? Maybe are you gonna have what you have at a business school, people learning from the internet, coming or wherever they get their sources from, and sharing that in form of these syndicates or small tutorials. That will be something that the experts on teaching and learning can advise on. But that is my view, and that's a view that's resonant across the world.
Thank you. The next question, and I'm not picking on you, it's a question, this is leadership, this is leadership dialogue, so it's about leadership. So I'm not picking on you. It's a question that we ask our guests in various ways. We vary it, but it's about your leadership. How would you describe your leadership philosophy? What leadership principles do you subscribe to?
No, that's a very, I think don't be apologetic at all. And I think I told you, just don't go easy, I'm still warming up. I expect even harder questions. Being a leader, and I think is to be I'm not saying this in a self-effacing way. You need to have a stamina to be a glutton for punishment, because it's not just punishing, it's a job that is demanding of you. You've got to be everywhere and be everyone to, and therefore that requires stamina, tenacity, and a sense of humor, right? My views on leadership is take your job and your work very seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. It's about the job after all. I give everything to my job, but and that means that you should be able to respond positively to criticism, right? It's not about you, it's about your role as the CEO, as the Vice-Chancellor. It's not personal. And that actually is what makes me sleep peacefully. I don't miss any sleep at all, even in the middle of a crisis. I sleep well, actually, surprisingly enough. And number two, I think that is one thing that is taken for granted. And whether I have achieved that or not is another story. And we are all work in progress. Is authenticity. I think one always has to keep on. It's a constant state of self-improvement, to actually try as best as we can to be an authentic leader, and be able to have difficult conversations with people and relay bad messages in a way that doesn't slight or insult them. But yet we must deliver bad news at the same time. And we must be able to take decisions that are not kind, right? At an individual level, but at a broad institutional level, they are what you think are in the broader interest of the community. And I think that is my leadership principle, just based on those three facts. Don't take yourself too seriously, have a laugh. And two, try to be as authentic as you possibly can, because there's no true authenticity. We are searching for it. We are mere mortals. And third, be kind of firm but kind, if that is the right way of putting it.
And what are your career highlights? What do you say your career highlights and your career regrets?
My career highlights, I think, was to, how can I say this without being, now that's a tough question, because I was actually to take South Africa and lead and develop a program that changed the face of physics. I developed South African particle physics. I took South Africa to CERN. I'm going to say this for the last time. that was my highlight. I think that is the biggest achievement I made in my life, to actually put South Africa on that world map, that now we're able to attract some of the best scholars in the world who came here. And I think I did play a small part in that. And also, personally, that is because, I mean, in my area of work, people who look like myself are few. I mean, you think of a particle physicist who works in Geneva, you know, you don't think of someone coming from this continent or looking like me. So I think, in a way, you know, standing in front of like tough Russians who ask tough questions and being able to, you know, respond back with confidence and that I know what I'm talking about. I think that is something that I want to instill to the next generation, that the world owes you nothing, that actually it's a cool world out there. You've got to be tough and be able to face what is the world that doesn't care about where you come from, about your history. And in our pursuit of science, we search for the truth, and the truth can be unkind sometimes. So I think that is the highlight in terms of my role in building this kind of science in my country, from what I learned when I was in Geneva. The low lights actually was a mistake I did as part of building my career. I got a bit arrogant as a PhD student. I was trying to solve this problem, and my supervisor advised me that no, I said, no, I know it better, because not only a PhD student, you're so focused, and the supervisor really does not know your field. You know, he knows the high level. It's just almost like a ground control for the aeroplanes, and then you're the pilot. So I actually told my supervisor to back off, and I thought I'd found a solution that was going to solve, you know, address a big problem and almost be Nobel Prize winning. That was what is called hubris. And I gave this talk in 1998 in Milan as part of my PhD. Luckily, I hadn't submitted it, so I could correct before I submitted. I said, no, I found this calculation and solved this problem. I mean, I know everything. And some Russian guy stood back and said, there's a problem with the calculation there, in a much tougher language, because, you know, they're like rubbish. I'm like, hey, and then I went and checked. There was an error in how I did some of the code. You know, these things happen. And that was the longest flight back to South Africa. Really, I went through 1 month of depression. And this taught me one lesson, you know. It's a famous Greek curse called hubris, you know, and it humbles you.
Before we almost.
Yes, that was a tough one. Don't ask me a question like that again.
No, we have to talk about this. But before I hand over to Maurice, I'd like to ask you, and you know, the last two questions, and Maurice will close. My boss, our director, if you could just very, very crisply and briefly, you know, this country is in dire need of role models like you, and you know, great academic achievement, global scholar. So if you're to, what are the key lessons that you've learned that you can impart to the next generation of scholars? That's the first question. And the last question is, you know, you are 9 months into this job, and there's still a long way to go before you complete your tenure. But you know, by the end of your tenure, what things you would have loved or wanted to have accomplished for yourself and Wits? You know, in other words, what would success look like at the end of your tenure? What would success look like for you and for Wits?
One, I think at the end of my tenure, whenever that will be, I want Wits to be to use the boxing balances, the undisputed leader of higher education on the African continent and the global south. Whether that translates to rankings, but when you think of the go-to place for everything in South Africa, your entry point must be Wits. Then I think we'll have been bold enough to achieve that without any dispute at all.
And the lessons that, you know, the next generation of scholars, things that you like them to learn from you?
Well, I don't have much to teach. What they should learn, I think they should learn tenacity. I think I'm not saying this out of false modesty. I'm not here, not only as in terms of my modest achievements in physics, which I think as I call a very tough area and it's very unfamiliar to us, not because of my superior intelligence. It took tenacity, you know, kind of a Rocky type level of taking punishment and just soldiering on. I think that the next generation needs to have tenacity. It's tough out there, and I think I'm saying this that your wits and skills won't take you anywhere as long as you don't have the stamina to walk the journey and take the punches as you go along. So tenacity is central because there will be so many obstacles. Many of us have had to, as I give an expression earlier on in my response to the second question about regret. We've all had our fair share of having our faces on the mud, but it's not a question of hitting the canvas. It's a question of standing up before the count of 8. That's tenacity.
All right, Professor Zeblon Vilakazi, Vice-Chancellor, Principal, University of the Witwatersrand. Thank you so much for making time available for us to have this conversation with you this afternoon, you know, and thank you for being so open, so transparent, and also making yourself vulnerable. We really, really appreciate your time and your insights. It's now for me to hand over to my colleague, Professor Maurice Khadebe, to offer a words of thanks, you know, a vote of thanks to you. Over to you, Maurice.
If it was in a face-to-face, I would be clapping hands now, you know. This was a good boxing match. And I'm not gonna referee here, but I think
I'm bruised.
You came out really on top there, Zeblon. Sorry to call you your first name.
Please.
Yeah, you know, I know Bramils can throw very difficult punches, but Bramils is giving you a run for your money. Eh? Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'll finish with you. Let me thank the people that really made this thing work. First, Bramils, I think your vision of this leadership dialogues, particularly the way you do it, the style, the thinking, the preparation behind it, and the research you do is just outstanding. So thank you again. You're taking it to the next level, And again, it's important. It really helps the whole school and the whole brand. And our whole technical team led by Rotendo, Jen, you know, these are Jaytin, these are unsung heroes. Prof, I'd like you to know that we've got people who are dedicated. They work hard, 24 hours, and they make some of us look good, but really all the work is done by them. And please send my regards to all the other team members that work behind you, Tembeka. We truly appreciate. Zeblon, you know, we grew up together. In fact, you know, in Katlehong. And I'm very proud of you. I'm really proud of you. You know, I can say this because I've seen you as a young boy, and I'm a little bit older than you, but growing up and becoming at the apex of academia, and then listening to you articulating broad concept of global stage. And I'm not going to try to even summarize what you said. But two things that really struck me. First, you said the universities are a place to inspire. Wow, that's very important because, and it resonated with me very well because this is where we need to inspire the future leaders and leaders in all sectors of our community. Not only, you know, sometimes you've defined leadership as political leadership. And I remember having this conversation with you. We need to change that mindset. So that people should not think leaders are political leaders, but leaders in science like you have led us, leaders in education, leaders and in the practical artisanship, plumbing and fixing machines and rebuilding our infrastructures. These are our leaders. And so I think we need to have that inspiration. And I think the second thing that you really inspire me is that you put it bluntly that the world owes our young people nothing. And I think we need to be blunt about that, because there's this huge entitlement mentality amongst our young people. And I think we need to make sure that they understand that they will work hard. The world doesn't care where you're coming from. You need to stand up and be counted. And finally, what really inspired me is your last word when you says you want to be Wits to be undisputable champion of the world. It reminded me Cassius Clay and Muhammad Ali, the undisputed champion of the world, in particularly Global South. And you keep on using these words very carefully, Africa and Global South. And I promise you that we are here, your foot soldiers, and WBS will put our shoulder on the wheel to make sure that you achieve that role of becoming an undisputed leader in Africa and Global South. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much. All the best. Stay safe, stay healthy, and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, VC. Good evening.
Thank you.